This is a CNBC original. In this episode of American Greed, a crime spree on the internet using stolen information.
It's basically a supermarket of cybercrime,
where mysterious thugs trade your financial life story. Millions of dollars are at stake.
They followed the money all along. Fraud migrates to opportunity.
And an unlikely computer genius fights to control it all.
This was spy versus spy. It was quite an ego boost.
Phone call.
So I asked my husband to get the phone, and it happened to be the manager of a big box store up in Wisconsin. And she said, I know this might seem like a strange call, but there's a woman in the store who says she's...
The store is calling because the woman seems to be buying as many high-priced items as she possibly can. Julie's mind is racing. Who is this woman in the store? How did she get her personal information? And how much damage has she done?
So when she was about the 4,700 mark, she said to them, how many more iPods can I get before I hit...
Of identity theft, joining the 10 million Americans whose lives have been turned upside down by this crime every year.
I was exposed in a way that I've never been exposed before, and I've worked a long time to have good credit, and I've worked a long time to have financial security for my family, and suddenly it's out there, and I have no idea who has it, and I have no idea how they're going to...
Cost U.S. businesses and individuals an estimated $54 billion. Credit card numbers and identities like Julie's are bought and sold by the thousands on websites called Carter's Forums. It's an underground economy, run by gangs that are global, sophisticated, and highly organized. At the top of the pyramid are the Godfathers. People like... Butler is a brilliant computer hacker. His theft ring traffics an estimated 1.8 million stolen credit cards. And he leads the feds on a year-long game of cat and mouse. In an exclusive interview with American Greed before entering federal prison, Butler explains his scheme.
From law enforcement's perspective, these carding forums are probably another paradigm of mafias, and now you've got this open source mafia, where people just go on the internet and form little ad hoc collectives and plan who knows what.
Most people think of a hacker as a person working by themselves.
Keith Malarski is a special agent with the FBI who spends years undercover as a hacker, working to bring down cyber criminals like Max Butler.
In my own experience, I went in his room with a computer trying to hack into something with a modem. But really, that over the years, that's changed now, where this is really organized crime.
Carter's Forums traffic in millions of stolen identities every year. It's a multi-billion-dollar business worldwide. Before he becomes a Don of Idaho.
I was a computer geek from a young age. My father worked with computers. He worked at IBM, and then he worked at a local computer store, and then he started his own computer store. So I always had access to machines, and I started programming when I was 8, and was into video games, and I was quite a geek, really.
Butler begins hacking in his teens. By college, he's breaking into the network of Boise State is just for kicks.
The administrators there were watching me and watching my activities because I was a very curious person. I would go into the binary directory. Well, that caught their attention. Like, what's this guy doing? As they started paying attention to me, I started paying attention to them. We're kind of watching each other, and that was like an early sparring match that happened.
But behind the geeky demeanor, there lurks a history of violence. In his freshman year in Fen-Phen, he is convicted of aggravated assault and receives a stiff 5-year sentence. In 1995, his prison stint over, the 22-year-old Butler tries to build a new life in San Francisco.
Friends told me that you can just move computers around physically and make $30 an hour, let alone if you actually knew how to use one. And I did.
Hacked for fun. Now he can turn hacking into a lucrative career. He goes to work as a computer security consultant.
He's what they call a white hat hacker. And in fact, he epitomized it. He made a lot of money doing penetration tests. You would pay him to break into your computer to test your security, but at the same time, he donated his services for free to nonprofit groups.
He goes by the name Max Vision and enjoys an almost celebrity status among the hacking elite.
I have a really good reputation for always finding the holes because I was very good at what I did. And I set up a website, Max Vision, Network Security, and whitehats.com.
In fact, he's so good that the FBI office in San Francisco asks for his help.
I got to do what I loved. I was already spending most of my waking hours doing security research. Now I can actually apply it and give a nice written report to someone. It made me feel good. It was a very useful service. I really helped a lot of people.
But life as a white hat hacker isn't exciting enough for Butler. He starts to break into private networks without permission.
These defense systems.
A couple things were really wrong about that. One is I didn't get permission. I didn't have permission from any of the people who I actually went and fixed their systems. I didn't have permission from the FBI. They didn't say, hey, this is an okay project. They didn't actually respond to the email. Next time I had contact with them, it was in person, like, hey, what's going on? The Air Force Office of Special Investigation in my living room.
Butler is charged with computer 15 months in federal prison. It is his second time behind bars. He's only 28 years old. While Butler sits in prison, hacking culture undergoes a dramatic transformation.
The real migration that we saw beginning around 2000 was hackers getting into systems for profit. So their targets are all monetary.
Enforcement also undergoes a transformation. In 2002, in an effort to combat cybercrime, the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance, or NCFTA, is created. Among its top targets are the Carter's Forums. American Greed is given special access to NCFTA's headquarters in Pittsburgh.
This here is a screenshot of Carter Planet. Credit cards, social security numbers, dumps or caching, you can go in there. There's a thread here for IDs, so anything you want to know about passports, counterfeit driver's licenses, you can go into that form.
As the world of hacking evolves in the outside world, on the inside, Max Butler is forging new relationships with criminals.
We would just walk the yard as exercise. We talk about what could be done. So we talk about it in a sort of fanciful way, like, oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Next on American Greed, prison yard scheming goes active, costing victims more than $80 million. And Max Butler is reborn as Iceman.
He's this elite hacker, and he's making over $1,000 a day.
In 2002, computer hacker Max Butler is released from prison, having served 18 months for computer fraud. Butler used to work as a white hat hacker, identifying and fixing security holes in computer networks. But now, he's a twice convicted felon. And, as Max Butler says in an exclusive interview,
I got desperate and I actually started going and looking for minimum wage work. I went to those places where you show up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and you do manual labor, move boards around, whatever. And I couldn't get placed there, because there would be a queue, a seniority. And so I would just end up sitting there all morning and nobody would even hire me there.
former hacker Kevin Polson knows how. As a 25-year-old, Polson was arrested for computer intrusion and money laundering. Now, he's a husband and father, and senior editor at Wired.com. Polson is writing a book on Butler.
He was ready to make some money. He needed the money.
Butler soon finds a way to make some cash. Through an old prison buddy, he is introduced to Christopher Aragon. Aragon counterfeit credit cards. Aragon tells Butler that they have complementary skill sets.
Butler was the hacker extraordinaire who could obtain access to computer systems. Aragon, who was also quite computer savvy, was very adept at social manipulation.
The initial plan is simple. Butler will target Carter Forums, the black market. He'll hack into their computer systems, steal credit card numbers, and sell them to Chris Aragon, who will make fake credit cards. It's a scam that Keith Mularski, an FBI special agent who has gone undercover on Carter Forums, has seen many times before.
So what we have here is a MSR 206, which is the most popular magnetic writer and reader. The guys have designed a program called the Germ, which will enable you to take the credit card number and write it onto the magnetic strip on the back. So what you do is you take the card, and then you just swipe it, and it's as easy as that.
The fake credit cards look legitimate.
You can see the quality on the card here is very good. The hologram, the MasterCard hologram is good. And even a security measure, it would pass that.
But the hackers won't use the credit cards themselves. Chris Aragon hires teams of young girls called cashers, or sometimes mules, to go on a high-end shopping spree.
Girls that he'd met in clubs or friends of friends, and say, hey, would you like to go shopping? And show them, credit cards that you could just use for whatever. They would all go into a mall complex and just go crazy, buy whatever they could, fill up a SUV, and then they would try to go fence that merchandise.
Aragon's crew would then use online auction sites to sell some of the stolen goods.
So it will appear like a legitimate product, and they could sell it for a discount, and then that's how the lower-end people will make their money.
Butler and Aragon figure the scam will bring in
Money would trickle back to me. It was never half. Really, I got scraps. But I had this idea that maybe I would get half, but that never worked out.
To make the scheme more profitable, Butler needs a steady stream of credit card numbers. He goes straight to the motherlode, the Carter's Forums, where hackers like him buy and sell numbers and identities like pirates. In 2003, Butler and Aragon spring into action. The partners set up their hacking operation in hotel rooms around San Francisco, where the air is thick with Wi-Fi signals.
We would choose a location based on access to wireless networks.
He would have it packed with computer equipment, including a high-end.
Using someone else's Wi-Fi network means Butler can hack away without leaving a trace.
He would use a giant antenna in order to hack into Wi-Fi signals from neighboring apartments or from across the street in order to have an anonymous internet connection that he felt couldn't really be traced back to him.
Once he's up and running on a hijacked Wi-Fi, Butler logs on to Carter's Forums and looks for
Of their machines, and I was watching them. This was spy versus spy. It was me against them, and it was quite an ego boost. I got a rush from it.
When he finally breaks through security, Butler loots all the financial data another criminal has already stolen. He steals thousands of credit card numbers, passwords, and pens, and funnels them to his partner, Chris.
Incubator, I would just try to churn out information to provide to him.
In time, it's a well-oiled machine. Butler nets close to $10,000 a month, but the hacking location, or safe house, has to change every few months to stay one step ahead of the law. But law enforcement is close behind. When American Greed returns, a mole has infiltrated the town, Iceman. In San Francisco in June 2005, computer hacker Max Butler and his partner Chris Aragon are stealing credit card numbers with impunity. And they're leaving a wake of financial disaster. Now calls himself Iceman online, hacks into Carter's Forums, the illegal websites where criminals buy and sell stolen financial data. Greed has gotten the best of him. He wants more. He's even hacking into banks and credit unions.
He's in this cyber underground where he's this elite hacker, and he's making over $1,000 a day. That's very, very good when your ego gets involved, where you think that you can't be caught.
Butler justifies his criminal acts by telling himself he's just sticking it to banks.
I made myself feel better about, not actually hurting people, individuals. Of course, it turns out I did actually cause quite a bit of, more than just an inconvenience, quite an ordeal for a lot of people.
In late 2009, someone using stolen identity information opened up several lines of credit at various stores. They almost get away with charging $11,000 in her name.
This is not a victimless crime. They may think it is, but I was the victim.
Depending on the case, it can take up to 2 years of painstaking work to clear one.
Hours that I've had to put into this to try to fix my credit, and the amount of stress that's gone into this and the amount of time it's taken away from my work schedule and from my family has been tremendous.
Back in his safe house in San Francisco, Iceman is not thinking of his victims. He's thinking about how he can get even more at their own Carter's Forum. They call it Carter's Market.
The name was actually his idea. He wanted Carter's Market. He felt that sort of business motive was appropriate.
Both partners see an upside in the arrangement, an opportunity to greatly expand their market.
Max wanted to be able to sell credit card information to more than just Aragon. Aragon wanted to be able to sell accounts entirely relying on the purchases that his cashiers were making. So they both had a stake in this.
Butler creates a sliding scale for his wares, and it may be surprising how cheaply the market prices a stolen credit card. He charges $12 for a Visa Classic, $16.50 for a MasterCard, $36 for American Express. And like any reputable vendor, his inventory runs deep.
Dumps or credit cards, you need to have a supply of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cards.
The credit card numbers are coming from other Carter's forums that Butler has hacked into. Every month, Butler is selling more than 250 dumps, the stolen financial and identity data. His reputation as master hacker is sealed.
He definitely became one of the top 5 dumps vendor here.
I really think that Iceman was the first real elite hacker to run one of these carding forums.
What's more, Butler and Aragon are frustrating law enforcement.
The real difficulty with a cybercrime case is the degree of anonymity that the internet affords. It's not the typical situation where you have amass the proof that puts that person behind the keyboard.
The Carter's forums are notoriously tight-knit and suspicious of outsiders. Prospective members must have an existing member vouch for their character.
You need to know another criminal in there, generally a couple of criminals where you've done business with them enough so that they will vouch for your credibility in order to be a member.
High-tech encryption.
Now they've moved to encrypted communications on encrypted servers, so it makes it very difficult for law enforcement. And now we have to find other avenues to get into the groups in order to get into their very secret communications. So the criminals know that law enforcement now is looking at them, so as a result, they're evolving in their techniques.
Butler is worried. For one thing, he thinks his partner, Chris Aragon, is spending money too lavishly and drawing too much attention to himself.
His crew was young and they liked to party, so there were nights out, and they'd go to clubbing in Las Vegas. We'd spend $1,000 on a meal, another $1,000 on wine.
I wasn't really so much as excited about that. I wanted to be,
And there's a much bigger worry. In 2004, a federal dragnet called Operation Firewall brings down a Carter's forum called Shadow Crew. 28 people are arrested, ratcheting up the already fearful and paranoid atmosphere in the Carter's forums. In a world where everyone hides behind a screen name, no one knows who might be an undercover FBI agent.
Especially after Operation Firewall. Nobody really knows who they can trust, and so a lot of accusations get thrown around.
Iceman begins to obsess that an FBI mole might penetrate Carter's market, or even a rival website, and bring their good times to a screeching halt.
He decided there were too many competing forums, and it was dividing up the business. Vendors were scattered. The criminal underground would be better off under a single board and under his benign rule.
At one point, I thought it would be beneficial to just get all the information in one place.
Butler wants to take over and control the Carter's forums, so he can weed out suspicious characters who might be working with law enforcement. He decides to plot a hostile takeover of his 4 main rivals, and the Vouched. If he can take all their users and bring them under his umbrella, he figures he can exercise total control over who has access to the site. He spends 2 months preparing. Then in August 2006, Butler locks himself in his safe house.
And in one spree, a 48-hour session where I stayed awake, I went through and checked them off their database, shut their site down, deleted their database, imported it into ours, and built up Carter's Market. And I don't know, it seemed fun at the time.
He looks proud, and he is. Emails, usernames, passwords of everyone who bought and sold on the sites. The information is all his. It's like a mob boss taking out the heads of Carter forums.
It was a huge boost for Carter's Market. He went from 1,500 users to 6,000 users overnight with this hostile takeover.
The takeover merits a lengthy article in USA Today, which dubs Carter's Market the Walmart of Carter's forums.
Carter's Market was the only place to do business now.
When American greed returns, Iceman seems in total control. In August 2006, Max Iceman Butler is at the top of his game. As founder and administrator of the illegal website Carter's Market, he and partner Chris Aragon oversee a month is described as the Walmart of the digital underground, and Max Butler is its CEO.
Mr. Butler, in running that website, had complete control of who could access it and the extent of their access.
But, as the saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Butler has hacked into the sites of his main competitor. This hostile takeover has brought a serious backlash.
What that did was really upset or ticked off a lot of the other people running the other sites out there. And the equivalent of a cyber war broke out, or gang war broke out between the rival factions.
People were very angry about it, especially the people that ran the other forums. Users didn't know what to think. Right away, some people accused us
Called El Mariachi, who'd been in the scene forever, who had already decided that Iceman was an informant just because he was so arrogant. And after the hostile takeover, El Mariachi started calling out Max online, saying, you're obviously a snitch, goading him on, and there were threats exchanged.
It could be dismissed as hackers' drama. But for the federal agents, this cyber war presents an opportunity. FBI agent Keith Malarski works undercover as a hacker named Master Splinter. He sees a chance to boost his undercover reputation and expand the scope of the investigation.
There was a lot of warring going on. People really didn't know who to trust. So they were looking for names that had been around for a while, and people started coming to me and asking me, whose side am I on? And that really opened up the opportunity for us to take the investigation to the next level.
Agent Malarski creates a legend of Master Splinter as one of the world's best spammers.
What that enabled us to do was really penetrate a number of different groups, because spamming is really the
Young Agent Malarski, as Master Splinter, gets the Carter site Dark Market up and running again, after Butler has hacked into it and shut it down.
After Dark Market came back up, Max continued to hack back into it. It was an ongoing war.
Max and I kind of became enemies, and he hated me. There were a lot of people going back and forth, or do you know what Iceman's doing now, or Iceman's going to try to hack you.
They're mortal enemies on the internet. But in reality, Agent Malarski doesn't know the true identity of Iceman, or have any idea where in the world he's operating from. All that's about to change. The FBI joins ranks with the U.S. Secret Service, and in the spring of 2006, the Secret Service developed members on Carter's Market who have decided to work with law enforcement and provide the federal agents a glimpse behind the curtain of this black market.
They had an informant on the site who was also an administrator who was able to give them information from the inside as well. So they were working to find out who Iceman was.
In that fall of 2006, with the SIM card accounts from Butler,
Max presumably thought he was corresponding with somebody in Eastern Europe and that he'd be safe. And in fact, it wound up in Pittsburgh.
it's a small sale worth just $480. But for the Secret Service, it's a big moment.
That instantly gives them the case. When you sell anybody stolen credit card information, you're automatically a felon.
To steal more financial data, Butler sends a corrupted link to the email accounts of 500 employees at Capital One Bank.
So hundreds of people clicked on this link in Capital One, and they got infected with this, giving him access to their internal network.
But his plan backfires. Capital One contacts the FBI, who trace the case against Butler is building. But Iceman is a worthy adversary. He suspects, correctly, that Master Splinter is a federal agent.
Max saw that Master Splinter was logging on not from Eastern Europe, where he was supposed to be based, but from an office building at Pittsburgh.
It's the building that houses the NCFTA.
So Iceman shouted to the hills to anybody who would listen that Master Splinter was a Fed and a Dark Market was a sting operation being run by the FBI or the NCFTA. He would tell anybody that would listen.
For Malarski/Master Splinter, being outed threatens to kill his operation in the cradle.
So we had to do some scrubbing because we had just taken over the site, and now this was the potential to...
For Agent Malarski, Iceman cries wolf one too many times, having accused people before of being federal agents. Malarski also has a world-class support team, which scrubs the data of any tie to the federal government.
So now when Iceman made his big reveal to the world that Master Splinter was part of the NCFTA, none of that stuff was there. It was legit. So they just thought that Iceman was throwing dirt at me. So there was a lot of allegations where people were calling one another cops or feds all the time. And luckily for me, I was just kind of in that wave of all this allegations, and I was able to survive it.
Next on American Greed, authorities are closing in. The big break comes when they nab real name. Will he give up his partner? In spring 2007, Max Butler, aka Iceman, is living the hacker's dream, illegally breaking into systems and getting paid good money for it. On a website called Carter's Market. It's an online bazaar where crooks can buy and sell stolen credit card and identity information.
Carter's Market website was founded by Mr. Butler and a close associate of his, Christopher Aragon, largely so that they would have complete control over the servers and the access to that market.
But in an interview with American Greed,
I had been sort of winding down, wanting to get out from under the forum.
but it's too late. The feds are closing in on Iceman.
So things started to unravel for Max very rapidly. There were two things that happened.
First, a young Carter named Jonathan Giannone, aka Zebra, is arrested for wire fraud and identity theft. An early administrator, Iceman, and he's looking at several years in prison.
The Secret Service came to him and said, if you want to help yourself, you're going to tell us everything you know about Iceman, the guy that did this hostile takeover.
The Zebra has one card to play.
He didn't know who Iceman was, but he did know Chris Aragon, and he knew that Chris Aragon worked closely with Iceman in real life.
Only one, that was Christopher Aragon.
If the Secret Service can get to Chris Aragon, there's a good chance they can stop Iceman. The opportunity comes quickly. On May 12, 2007, Aragon is arrested trying to use one of his counterfeit cards to buy $13,000 worth of luxury purses at Bloomingdale's.
Following that arrest, police and their electronic devices in connection with Aragon's business activities and criminal activities. Part of that information was shared with the United States Secret Service and was made available to us in our case.
Just like Zebra, Chris Aragon puts self-preservation above loyalty. Facing charges of commercial burglary and identity theft, Aragon decides to talk. Doesn't know his current one. And he tells them something even more vital. Iceman's true identity.
Chris was really the only one that knew that Iceman was Max Butler.
For the first time in this investigation, the feds now know who they're looking for. A 6'5", brown-haired white male who lives in the San Francisco area, named Max Butler. He quickly abandons his current safe house.
I was in a apartment that he provided, so I got out of there. So I changed location. I got rid of all my wireless gear.
But the Secret Service has key information. They get the name of Butler's girlfriend from an associate of Aragon's and track down her address. It's now a shoe leather investigation. Once Butler leaves, they follow him straight to his safe house.
And they followed him as he moved some of his stuff into his new safe house. So they just followed him right to the front door, literally to the front door.
But they don't rush in. Not yet. Aragon had told them that Butler has a kill switch program that can immediately destroy evidence.
We knew he had encryption on that computer and it was going to be
Locked and encrypted. In my mind, encryption was this blanket that made them not even real. I didn't see the computers as computers. When they were encrypted, in my mind, they're bricks. And it's kind of hard to explain that. You think, well, are you crazy? But I really believed that.
They called on the expertise of CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team based in Pittsburgh.
These are some of the country's foremost experts in the area of ways to get into that computer and obtain the evidence that we're seeking in the search.
The arrest has to go down without a hitch. On September 5th, 2007, after a 16-month investigation, the feds are ready to move. Several Secret Service agents, along with FBI agent Malarski, charge into Butler's safe house.
And I'm just in shock.
The computer experts get to work.
I thought that they were going in and collecting bricks. I thought they had nothing. Of course, that's not the case. They have some really sharp people. And they were able to get all that information.
The takedown is successful. They get to Butler's computer before any evidence can be destroyed. The amount of stolen data in Butler's
Fraudulent charges on the 1.8 million plus cards in Mr. Butler's possession as of the date of the search was $86.4 million.
At the time, it is the largest identity theft and hacking case in the country's history. On September 11, 2007, Butler is charged with 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of lines can put him behind bars for 40 years. The charges reflect a small fraction of the real cost of Butler's crimes.
The effect on our economy is huge, obviously, when you're talking about a case of this size. Financial institutions are under enough stress in this country, and the effect of hacking activity and identity theft for employees to those whose cards are compromised, to individuals who want to then apply for credit in this country.
On June 29, 2009, Butler pleads guilty to wire fraud charges. His guilty plea in cooperation with the feds helped Butler avoid a possible sentence of 40 years. On February 12, 2002, $27.5 million in restitution. At the time, it is the longest sentence for hacking in U.S. history. With Butler and Aragon behind bars, Carter's Market eventually closes down. But Dark Market keeps its doors open. Master Splinter isn't finished yet. Slowly, one by one, administrators on Dark Market and other sites begin to span the globe. The only high-ranking member of Dark Market that hasn't been arrested is Master Splinter. It's time to close up shop.
I wrote a going-away letter to the members of Dark Market saying there are too many feds and law enforcement on this site. It's been penetrated. Iceman was arrested. All the other administrators have been arrested, and I'm not going.
Market prevents more than $150 million worth of loss for businesses and individuals worldwide.
Within the cybercrime area, there is a bit of an arms race that goes on.
Today, law enforcement and business must wage a full-out assault if they are to keep ahead of cyber criminals.
There is this constant one-upmanship that goes on professionals that are involved in protecting business networks. This is very important to us as law enforcement because we also have to be on the cutting edge of the technology.
We can get you. So you can't hide from us, and we have our international coalitions, and we're working very closely together with them in order to combat this problem.
For victims like Julie, it's too little, too late.
I will have to pay for my card, nothing on it. And that's really the maddening part. That's the part that gives me anxiety attacks, is like, what else could I be doing to protect myself here? How can I stop this from becoming this nightmare of trying, just basically like being the detective myself and trying to sort this out and figure out what steps to take. How do I protect myself?
Chris Aragon is currently awaiting trial in California for Max Butler serves his time in a federal penitentiary. The Bureau of Prisons says Butler may have limited access to computers behind bars.
In this case, greed was certainly a motive, but what's obvious from the communications and the risks that Mr. Butler took is that ego also played a very big role. Perhaps the biggest disappointment, someone who is very bright, very creative, and could have used his talents to benefit society and ultimately himself, and instead he chose a path that would harm many people and businesses and ultimately harm himself.
Illegal hacking can be seductive. It's a thrill, it's an ego rush to be able to get into. It's a temptation, but it's worth it to resist that temptation. I would say go to school, get an advanced degree, and stay out of trouble. I wish I had that advice back then.
That if you were overweight, it was a cure-all for self-esteem and making you feel good about going out.
Tell you how agonizing this illness is. Patients will describe it as slowly drowning. It is the worst disease, worse than cancer. It's not only is it bad, it's the way they die and how they suffer that's so miserable.
In 1996, Dr. Rich co-authors an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, Fen, and developing this deadly and incurable disease.
These pills sold in the brand name Redux, correct?
Dr. Rich goes on the Today Show to discuss his study.
And just how much do these pills increase one's risk of PPH?
The exact amount is hard to say because the longer you take it, the higher the risk becomes.
The study finds that taking the drug for just 3 months brings a 5...
The relative risk of getting lung cancer from cigarette smoke is 3. The risk of getting...
When American greed returns, 3 attorneys in Kentucky see the Fen-Phen settlement as their ticket to riches. How much they steal from their clients will shock you.
I would rather take a thief in the middle of the night in my living room, armed only with bare hands and my wits, than an unethical lawyer that uses my trust and his law degree as well.
Fen-Phen. When it hit the market, it was hailed as a godsend, a new and easy way to control weight.
What happens when you...
Gallion has done litigation for the University of Kentucky Medical School. Cunningham has financial expertise. But Mills is the breakout star. The 67-year-old lawyer is one of the first attorneys in Kentucky to put on a full-force ad campaign to attract clients.
Sort of wacky, but at the same time very memorable television commercials that usually ended with, if you have a problem, call the man.
With his network of commercials running throughout the state, Mills ends up bringing in the majority of clients, including W.L. Carter, who's been diagnosed with valve damage. Carter decides to stop by Mills's office in nearby Lexington.
Here come this boxer shorts and flip-flops. And he said, well, I'm Milburn Mills. Come on in.
As first impressions go, it is pretty strange, but Mills is convincing.
He led me to believe that he was looking out for my best interest. He said, we're going to make these drug companies pay. You'll be a lot better off with us than staying in with the national settlement. And that's what I did. And been very good.
It is not so good in these cases because in the end, you're talking about somebody with a family. It's somebody's life. And it just, all it was companies, lawyers, and somewhere in there, patients who just dropped through the cracks.
Coming up on American Greed, lawyers who are supposed to get contingency fees of slightly more than 30% end up taking a whopping 75%.
Any documentation about her settlement. And I thought, well, this is just a client who didn't the attorneys.
But when she calls the lawyers, she has a whole different take. Turns out they're refusing to let anyone see the settlement.
What you expect if you call a lawyer and say, look, I have a former client, they have some questions about how their settlement was handled, could we sit down and try and get those questions answered and I can pass on the information? That's not what happened here. And was told that no information would be provided about the settlement.
Ford talks to other plaintiffs and learns this.
The clients had only been paid approximately $45 million out of a $200 million settlement.
In other words, as Ford digs deeper, she finds layers of greed, starting with the settlement agreement, in which the lawyer...
They all thousands of retirees who had migrated to the desert to spend their twilight years in the shadow of the cigarros. Stewardship meant more than just money. It meant building the kingdom of heaven while securing a modest earthly comfort. But as the sun began to set on a decade of unprecedented growth, the line between divine providence and human greed began to thin. In the hallowed halls of the Baptist Foundation of Arizona, a new kind of gospel was being preached, a gospel of double-digit returns and magnificent money machines for God. They thought they were giving to the Lord. They didn't realize they were feeding a beast that would eventually consume everything they owned. Chapter 1, The Shepherd of Phoenix. Bill Kratz was not a man who walked. He processed. When he entered a room, the air seemed to settle, hushed by the sheer gravity of his reputation. At 34, he was already a legend within the Southern Baptist Convention, an attorney with a mind like a steel trap and a heart that supposedly beat for the "we give our money to a cold secular bank when we could give it to the foundation." They were paying 10%. The banks were offering 6%. It was a blessing. In their modest home, Bill and Pat sat across from a salesman who quoted scripture as easily as he cited interest rates. The salesman spoke of kingdom building. He showed them brochures featuring smiling seniors and new church steeples. Not one investor has ever lost a penny, the salesman promised, leaning in with a conspiratorial transferred into the hands of Bill Kratz. They weren't alone. Robert Shaw, a car salesman who had found sobriety and salvation in the pews after a midlife crisis, put in every cent he had, $250,000. He even set aside $60,000 for his daughter's college education, tucked away in what he believed was the safest place on earth. The money flowed into the BFA like a mighty river, but downstream, the water was already turning bitter. Chapter 2, The Architect's Shadow. Inside the posh Phoenix headquarters of the BFA, the atmosphere was corporate, but sanitized by a layer of religious piety. Portraits of missionaries hung alongside real estate maps. Bill Kratz sat at the head of a mahogany table, flanked by his right-hand man, Tom Grabinski. Grabinski was the legal mind, the man who drafted the contracts and navigated the regulatory labyrinths. Together, they were the architects of a vision that was rapidly outgrowing reality. The problem was the land. Kratz had bet everything on the Arizona real estate bubble. He bought raw desert land, commercial lots, and sprawling developments, convinced that the Phoenix sun would always keep prices rising. But in the late 1980s, the bubble didn't just leak, it burst. We're down for vision was seductive. The BFA would take the investments of church members' money meant for retirement, for a child's college fund, for a rainy day, and reinvest it in the booming Arizona real estate market. The profits would be split, a high interest rate for the investor, and a massive donation for Baptist causes. It was a win-win. It was a blessing. It was, as the brochures claimed, profiting for God. But in the quiet of his office, surrounded by maps of raw land and commercial developments, Kratz saw something the investors didn't. He saw the numbers, and the numbers were beginning to twitch. Chapter 2, The Sheep and the Shepherds. In a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix, Bill and Pat Anderson sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by brochures printed on glossy paper. Pat had survived a brain aneurysm 3 years prior, a miracle, they believed. Since then, the church had become their entire world. 10%, Bill, Pat whispered, her eyes tracing the figures. The bank only gives us 6. With 10%, we could finally afford to travel. We could give more to the mission fund. Bill Anderson, a retired plant manager who had spent 40 years counting every bolt and screw, nodded slowly. He was a man of logic, but he was also a man of God. They say not one investor has ever lost a penny, and it's audited by Arthur Anderson. You don't get bigger than that. In their minds, the BFA wasn't a financial institution. It was an extension of the altar. They weren't buying a security. They were performing an act of worship. They moved their $200,000, every cent they had saved, into the hands of Bill Kratz. Across town, Robert Shaw was dealing with his own demons. A car salesman who had found sobriety through the church. He felt he owed his life to the Southern Baptist Convention. When a salesman from the BFA visited his home, quoting scripture as easily as he quoted interest rates, Shaw didn't hesitate. He put $250,000 into the fund, including $60,000 specifically earmarked for his daughter's education. It's about stewardship, Robert, the salesman, had said, patting his shoulder. It's about being a good servant. The word stewardship acted like a magic spell. It bypassed the analytical centers of the brain and went straight to the soul. Chapter 3, The Cracks in the Foundation. By the early 1990s, the Arizona real estate bubble hadn't just burst, it had evaporated. The raw land the BFA had purchased with investor money was suddenly worth pennies on the dollar. In the sleek headquarters of the BFA, the air conditioning hummed, but the atmosphere was stifling. Bill Kratt sat across from his right-hand man, Thomas Grabinski. We can't report these losses. Tom, Kratt said, his voice devoid of its usual Sunday warmth. If the investors see a dip, the money stops coming in. If the money stops, the whole thing collapses. Grabinski, the in-house counsel, adjusted his glasses. He was the architect of the shadows. We don't report losses. We move them. They created a labyrinth. A company called Allo-Abad Bank was set up as a separate entity. On paper, BFA would sell its failing properties to Allo at inflated prices. Allo would pay for these properties with IOUS notes receivable. To an auditor looking at the surface, BFA was still profitable. It had millions in assets, but the assets were nothing more than promises from a company that was stone broke. It was a circular flow of ghost money. To keep the lights on, they needed new money. The Ponzi scheme was born in the name of the Lord. Chapter 4, The Whistleblower. Kyle Tresh arrived in Phoenix with a heart full of idealism. The son of a preacher, he saw the law as a way to protect the innocent. When he was hired by the BFA in 1994, he thought he had found his calling. You're doing the Lord's work here, Kyle, Kratz had told him on his first day. But Tresh was too good at his job. As he dug into the files, he began to notice the strange relationship with Allo. He saw the sham sales. He saw the mounting debt that was being hidden like a dirty secret under a prayer rug. He couldn't sleep. Every time he sat in a pew on Sunday and saw a family talking about their BFA investment, he felt a cold knot in his stomach. He tried to talk to Grabinski. It's a long-term strategy, Kyle, Grabinski said, his eyes cold behind his lenses. Real estate is cyclical. We're just smoothing out the bumps until the market recovers. Do you want to be the one who tells these people their retirement is gone? Or do you want to help us save it? It was the ultimate manipulation. Stay silent to protect the victims. In April 1996, Tresh and for staff accountants reached their breaking point. They confronted Kratz in a tense meeting that felt more like an interrogation. Kratz didn't flinch. He used his Pope persona Speaking of faith and vision, I cannot be a part of this, Tresh said, his voice trembling. He resigned, leaving behind a scathing letter that accused the leadership of fraud. He thought his departure would be the end. He didn't realize it was only the beginning of a long, lonely war. Chapter 5, The Collapse. The truth didn't come out in a thunderclap. It came in a slow, agonizing leak. In 1998, investigative reporter Terry Green Sterling began pulling on the threads Kyle Tresh had left behind. Her articles in the Phoenix New Times painted a picture of a foundation that was cooking the books. Kratz fought back with the only weapon he had left, spiritual warfare. These are attacks from Satan, he wrote in letters to investors. The enemy wants to destroy the work we are doing for the kingdom. For many, it worked. The Andersons and Robert Shaw ignored the newspapers. They trusted their pastors, who in turn trusted Bill Kratz. But the state of Arizona couldn't be ignored. In August 1999, the Corporation Commission issued a cease and desist order. The BFA was a hollow shell. When the bankruptcy hit 3 months later, the numbers were staggering. $600 million owed to 11,000 people. The assets were barely worth a third of that. The fallout was a silent scream across the state. Bill Anderson had heart attacks within weeks. He spent his nights in the garage, carving lawn ornaments to try and make back a fraction of what was lost. Robert Shaw had to sell his house and take a job washing cars at a rental agency just to keep his daughter in school. The golden machine had turned out to be a meat grinder. Part 2, The Doctor's Shadow. Chapter 6, The Healer of Edgewater. While the desert was mourning its lost millions, a different kind of darkness was taking root in the gray, humid streets of Chicago. Dr. Ronald Michos was a man of stature in the Edgewater community. He was a podiatrist who understood that medicine was as much about the soul as it is about the body, especially when your patients are elderly, lonely, and frightened. He made house calls. He sat in cramped kitchens, drinking tea and eating sandwiches offered by widows. He remembered their birthdays. He listened to stories about grandchildren who never called. "You're a saint, doctor," they would tell him. But Michos was a man living two lives. Beneath the professional demeanor was a man drowning in a prescription drug addiction and an insatiable need for money. He had children with multiple women, a divorce that had bled him dry, and a lifestyle he couldn't maintain on honest billings alone. He looked at the Medicare system and saw not a safety net for the elderly, but a bottomless ATM. Chapter 7, The Ghost Surgeries. The fraud was breathtakingly simple. Michos would visit a patient for a simple toenail clipping a routine, low-paying procedure. But when the bill went to Medicare, it would be for multiple, complex surgeries, incisions, bone scrapings, tendon repairs. He targeted the most vulnerable, those with dementia, those who were terminally ill, and those who simply trusted him too much to check their explanation of benefits EOB. One patient was billed for 351 surgeries. Mathematically, the man's feet should have been nothing but scar tissue and bone dust. In reality, he hadn't had a single operation. In 1 year alone, Maikos made over $400,000. He became the highest paid podiatrist in the state of Illinois. But the money vanished as quickly as it arrived, siphoned into the black hole of his addictions and personal failures. Chapter 8: The Investigator. Pete Tyler was a man who lived in the world of spreadsheets and billing codes. He worked for the Medicare contractor, and his job was to spot the anomalies. In 1998, a single complaint from a patient sparked a fire. The patient claimed they were billed for a surgery that never happened. When Tyler pulled Maikos's files, he felt a sense of vertigo. "This is impossible," Tyler whispered to his colleague, Renee Reyes. "He's billing for surgeries on the same toe every week. Nobody heals that fast." Reyes, an agent with Health and Human Services, began the money trail investigation. They discovered that Maikos wasn't just a fraud, he was a manipulator. He was coaching his patients, telling them the government was trying to take away their friend and their doctor. He handed out scripts. "Tell them I made tiny incisions. Tell them you don't remember because of the medication. Tell them I'm a good man." For many of the elderly patients, the threat of losing their only visitor was more terrifying than the thought of a little financial irregularity. They signed affidavits for him. They lied to the FBI for him, except for Joyce Brannon. Chapter 9: The Nurse in the Basement. Joyce Brannon was 54 years old and lived in the basement of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church. She was the caretaker, a woman whose life was defined by service. She was a former ICU nurse, a woman who knew exactly what a surgery looked like. When Pete Tyler and Renee Reyes visited her in September 2001, they didn't find a confused elderly woman. They found a witness. "Honey," Joyce said, her voice firm as she looked at the list of 70 surgeries Maikos had billed in her name. "I know what a foot surgery is. I've assisted in enough of them. And I can tell you, Dr. Maikos has never done anything to me but clip my nails." She wasn't afraid. She was offended. To her, Maikos hadn't just stolen money, he had profited from the sacred trust between a healer and a patient. "I'll testify," she said. "It's the right thing to do." Chapter 10: The Final House Call. Maikos knew the walls were closing in. His income had been frozen. He was living out of his car, his Lincolnwood home lost to foreclosure. He was a man with nothing left but his desperation. He called Joyce. He pleaded with her. "Don't you care what happens to me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I have a family." Joyce's response was the cold steel of a woman who had seen too much human suffering to be moved by a con man's tears. "You should have thought about that before you did this. Ronald, this is wrong." On a Sunday in late January, the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church was quiet. The morning service was over. and the congregants had gone home to their Sunday roasts. Joyce was in her basement apartment, likely relaxing after a day of work. She was sitting in a chair, facing the window, perhaps watching the gray Chicago sky. She didn't hear the footsteps. She didn't hear the door open. The man who had spent years healing the feet of the elderly now stood behind her with a .22 revolver. He had renewed his firearms license just 3 days prior. He had a note in his car with the church's service hours. He didn't speak. He fired 6 times. Joyce Brannon, the woman who cared about the truth, died in the very place she felt safest. Chapter 11, The Smoking Gun. The murder of a star witness 3 days before a grand jury is not a coincidence. It is a declaration of war. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sean Berkowitz took the call on Monday morning. She's dead. How? The investigation shifted from white-collar fraud to cold-blooded homicide. They searched Michaels' car and found the box of .22 ammunition, the handwritten notes about the church, and a single shell casing. They found his cache of weapons in a storage locker. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was a mountain. The motive was singular. The timing was perfect. Chapter 12, The Verdict of God and Man. In 2005, to trials brought to different kinds of greed to justice. In Arizona, Bill Kratz and Thomas Grabinski stood before a jury. They argued that they weren't criminals, just optimists caught in a bad market. They argued that if the state hadn't shut them down, everyone would have been paid back. The jury didn't buy it. You can't build a kingdom on a foundation of lies. Kratz was sentenced to 8 years, Grabinski to 6. In Chicago, Dr. Ronald Michaels faced a different fate. He was convicted of both the fraud and the murder of Joyce Brannon. In a system that usually favors the respectable professional, the jury saw the monster beneath the white coat. His sentence, death. Epilogue, the cost of faith. Greed is often painted in the colors of gold and silk, of fast cars and sprawling mansions. But the most dangerous kind of greed is the one that wears a cross. It is the greed that feeds on the desire of good people to do good. The Baptist Foundation of Arizona left thousands of elderly people in poverty, their faith in their church shattered like dropped glass. The halls of Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church remain, but the memory of Joyce Brannon serves as a haunting reminder of what happens when one person decides to stand up to the dark. Bill Anderson still carves his Uncle Sam's. Robert Shaw still struggles with his anger toward the church. And somewhere in a federal prison, Ronald Michaels waits for the end. The desert mirage is gone. The gray Chicago winter remains. And in the silence, the only thing left is the truth naked, painful, and final. The altar of avarice. A novelization of faith, fraud, and fatality. Prologue, the fragility of belief. The desert has a way of stripping a person down to their essence. In the scorched expanse of Arizona, where the horizon shimmers with the cruel deception of heat waves, People look for something solid. They look for a rock to stand on when the sand shifts beneath their feet. For thousands of souls in Phoenix, that rock was the Southern Baptist Church. It wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary of righteousness, a promise of eternal safety in a world that felt increasingly volatile. They thought they were giving to God. They believed that by handing over their life savings, the fruit of decades of labor, the widow's mite, and the retiree's nest egg, they were practicing wise stewardship. They were told their money would build low-income housing, feed the hungry, and spread the gospel, all while earning a tidy 10% interest. But greed is a chameleon. It can wear a suit and tie. It can quote scripture with a silver tongue. It can even hold a medical degree and offer a comforting hand to the elderly. In the sun-bleached offices of the Baptist Foundation of Arizona, a financial wizard was weaving a web of lies. And thousands of miles away, in the gray, wintry streets of Chicago, a podiatrist was sharpening a different kind of knife, one made of betrayal and cold, calculated murder. This is not just a story of lost money. It is a story of lost souls. It is the chronicle of what happens when the people we are taught to trust the most, the preacher and the healer, turn out to be the wolves at the gate. Part 1, The Arizona Mirage. Chapter 1, An Oasis in the Dust. Bill Anderson liked the way the morning light hit the Superstition Mountains. At 70, life was supposed to be about this: peace, a bit of handyman work in the garage, and the quiet presence of his wife, Pat. 3 years ago, the world had nearly ended for them. Pat had been diagnosed with a brain aneurysm, a ticking time bomb in the delicate architecture of her mind. In those dark hours of surgery and recovery, they hadn't turned to the banks or the fleeting comforts of the world. They had turned to the church. They were baptized in their later years, the cool water a symbolic washing away of their fears. It gave us an inner feeling of love and faith, Pat would say, her voice still holding a tremor of gratitude. They weren't alone. Robert Shaw, a car salesman who had spent his mid-30s drowning his demons in a bottle, had found the same lifeline. The Southern Baptist Church hadn't just saved his soul. It had simplified his life. It gave him a community where brother and sister weren't just titles, but promises. So, when the Baptist Foundation of Arizona BFA sent its emissaries into the pews, no one reached for their skepticism. Why would they? The BFA was a 34-year-old pillar of the community, and at its head was a man who moved through the congregation like a modern-day prophet, William Kratz. Chapter 2, The Wizard of Phoenix. Bill Kratz did not look like a swindler. He was a devout attorney, a man of sharp intellect and even sharper faith. When he walked into a church, the atmosphere shifted. People whispered his name with reverence. To the Southern Baptists of Arizona, Kratz was a financial genius who had been called by God to turn the foundation into a magnificent money machine for the kingdom. Stewardship, Kratz would say, leaning over the pulpit, his eyes burning with conviction. It is our duty to take the talents the Lord has given us and multiply them. We don't just invest in real estate. We invest in the Lord's work. The pitch was irresistible. While local banks offered a meager 6% on CDs, the BFA offered 10. It was kingdom building with a high yield. We thought it was the safest place in the world, Robert Shaw recalled. He put everything into $150,000, $250,000 intended to see his daughter through college and provide a cushion for his old age. The Andersons followed suit, liquidating their assets until they had nearly $200,000 tied up in the BFA. They weren't being greedy, they were being wise. Every month, the interest checks arrived like clockwork, allowing them to live comfortably, to give back, to breathe easy. And if anyone dared to ask about the risk, Kratz had the ultimate shield. Arthur Anderson, one of the big 5 accounting firms in the world. Every year, Arthur Anderson gave the BFA a clean bill of health. In a world of financial uncertainty, that signature was the seal of the covenant. But beneath the blessings and the clean audits, the BFA was a hollow shell. The Arizona real estate bubble of the late 80s had burst, and the foundation's assets had plummeted. Instead of admitting failure, Kratz had chosen a darker path. He began a shell game, creating off-book companies like Allo, a bad bank designed to absorb the losses, while the BFA continued to report imaginary profits. It was a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a prayer shawl. Chapter 3, The Whistleblower's Burden. Kyle Tresh arrived in Phoenix in 1994 with an idealist's heart. The son of a preacher, he was a young attorney who wanted his work to mean something. Joining the BFA felt like a divine appointment. The office morale was wonderful, Tresh remembered. It seemed, by all appearances, to be an incredibly successful organization. But as an attorney, Tresh had to look at the contracts. He had to follow the money. And the money led to Allo. He saw sham sales properties being moved from the BFA to Allo at inflated prices just to keep the losses off the main ledger. He saw an organization that wasn't generating profit from land, but from the pockets of new, unsuspecting investors. In April 1996, Tresh couldn't stay silent any longer. He stood in the posh Phoenix headquarters, confronting Bill Kratz and his right-hand man, Tom Grabinski. This is an investment strategy, Bill, Tresh said, his voice tight. It's a lie. You're manufacturing profits. Kratz didn't flinch. He spoke of long-term vision and maturing assets. He looked at Tresh not as a concerned colleague, but as a man of little faith. Tresh resigned. He walked away from the prestige and the paycheck, leaving a scorching resignation letter that accused the leadership of fraud. But the machine kept turning. Kratz dismissed the critics as instruments of Satan, and the faithful, conditioned to trust their leaders, turned their backs on the truth. Chapter 4, The Mirage Shatters. The first real crack in the facade came from an unlikely source, the Phoenix New Times. Investigative reporter Terry Green Sterling spent 6 months digging through public records, piecing together the labyrinthine money trail that Kratz had worked so hard to hide. When her articles hit the stands, Kratz went on the offensive. He sent letters to 11,000 investors. "These are wonderful days of blessing," he wrote, "but they have not come without attacks from Satan, our spiritual enemy. It worked for a time. I took the newspaper to my pastor," one investor recalled. "He told me, 'Oh no, I know Bill Kratz personally. Everything is above board. Don't worry.' But the state of Arizona was worrying. The Attorney General's office, bolstered by the testimony of Kyle Tresh and for brave accountants, began to close in. In August 1999, the hammer fell. The state forced the BFA to stop selling investments. 3 months later, the foundation collapsed into bankruptcy. It owed its investors nearly $600 million. Its actual assets were worth less than half that. For the Andersons, the news was a physical blow. It just scared the heck out of all of us, Pat said. Bill Anderson, the man who had found peace in the church, was suddenly a 70-year-old handyman again, carving wooden ornaments in his garage half-the just to make ends meet. He suffered to heart attacks in 2 weeks, the weight of the betrayal literally crushing his heart. Robert Shaw had to tell his daughter that her college fund was gone. He went from being a successful car salesman to washing rental cars for minimum wage. "I was embarrassed," he said. "I didn't know how to tell my family. The Wizard of Phoenix had vanished, leaving behind a desert of broken lives." Part 2, The Podiatrist's Sin. Chapter 5, The House Call. While the BFA was crumbling in the desert, a different kind of predator was operating in the heart of Chicago. Dr. Ronald Michaels was a man of sterling bedside manner. He was a podiatrist who understood that his elderly patients didn't just need foot care, they needed company. He made house calls. He sat in their kitchens, drinking tea and eating the cookies they laid out for him. He was the good doctor who cared when their own families were too busy. But Michaels had a secret. Between 1994 and 2001, he was billing Medicare for thousands of surgeries that he never performed. He was a master of the fragmented bill. Instead of billing for one surgery, he would bill for 10 for each toe, spaced out by a week. In 7 years, Medicare paid him over $1.7 million. He was the highest paid podiatrist in the state of Illinois. His patients, many of whom had dementia or were terminally ill, had no idea. They just knew the doctor was kind. They signed the papers he put in front of them because they trusted the man who brought them a smile once a month. One patient, Charles Labosco, was billed for a staggering 351 surgeries. To a legitimate doctor, that was a medical impossibility. To Michaels, it was a gold mine. Chapter 6, The Unyielding Witness. Joyce Brannon was different. At 54, Joyce was a former intensive care unit nurse. She was sharp, honest, and deeply religious. She lived in the basement apartment of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church, where she worked as a caretaker. She saw the world through the lens of duty and truth. When investigator Pete Tyler and FBI agent Renee Reyes began looking into Maikos' suspicious billings, they found Joyce's name. They visited her in her church basement. "Honey, I know what a foot surgery is," Joyce told them, her eyes flashing with clarity. "I'm a nurse. Dr. Maikos has been billing for 70 surgeries on my feet. He hasn't done a single one." Joyce Brannon was the silver bullet the feds needed. She wasn't confused. She wasn't dying. She was a credible, articulate witness who was willing to stand up in court and call a thief a thief. Maikos knew it. He called her. He pleaded with her. "I have a family," he said. "Don't you care what happens to me?" Joyce's response was as cold and hard as the truth itself. "You should have thought about that before you did this. This is wrong." Chapter 7. Silence in the Sanctuary. The Monday before Joyce was set to testify before a grand jury, the world went silent. A fellow church member found her. Joyce was in her basement apartment, sitting in a chair, facing the window. She looked almost peaceful, except for the 6-point .2 bullet holes in her back and head. She had been executed at point-blank range in the very place she felt safest, the house of God. The news sent a shockwave through the investigation. "We were stunned," said Assistant U.S. Attorney Sean Berkowitz, "to lose a star witness 3 days before testimony. It raised every red flag imaginable. The white-collar fraud case had suddenly turned into a hunt for a cold-blooded killer. Maikos, once the charming doctor, was now a man on the edge. His life was unraveling. He had a prescription drug problem, a burgeoning addiction to alcohol, and a bank account that had been frozen by the feds. He was living in his car, a fallen king haunted by his own greed. But he had been careful. He had a Palm Pilot where he meticulously recorded every interaction the feds had with his patients. He rated the interviews. Good if the patient lied for him, poor if they told the truth. Beside Joyce Brannon's name, the rating was clear. She had to be erased. Part 3, The Reckoning. Chapter 8, The Trail of Brass. The feds moved with a fury they usually reserved for the mob. They searched Maikos' car. They found a shell casing for a .2. They found a box of ammunition that matched the bullets in Joyce's brain. But the most chilling piece of evidence was a handwritten note. It contained the address of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church, the hours of the Sunday services, and a detailed map of how to get to the basement apartment. Maikos had hunted her. He had waited until the congregation was gone, until the hymns had faded, and then he had walked into that basement to silence the voice of the truth. In June 2002, Ronald Maikos was charged with murder. The trial was a collision of two worlds. the complex web of Medicare fraud, and the brutal reality of a homicide. The prosecution laid out the numbers, the $1.7 million stolen from the taxpayers, and then they showed the jury the photos of Joyce Brannon. In May 2005, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts. For the fraud, he received 6.5 years. For the murder of Joyce Brannon, the good doctor was sentenced to death. He now sits on death row in Terre Haute, Indiana, a monument to the ultimate cost of greed. Chapter 9, The Ashes of Faith. Back in Arizona, the wheels of justice turn more slowly. Bill Kratz and Tom Grabinski were finally brought to trial in September 2005. It was the longest criminal trial in the state's history. Kratz's defense was audaciously simple. If you hadn't shut us down, we would have made the money back. He blamed the state, the media, and the disgruntled investors for the collapse. But the jury didn't buy the miracle he was selling. They saw the shell companies. They saw the manufactured profits. Kratz was sentenced to 8 years in prison, Grabinski to 6. But for the 11,000 investors, the justice felt hollow. They eventually recovered about 70% of their money thanks to a massive settlement with Arthur Anderson, but they could never recover their faith. I lost my faith in the Southern Baptists, said Katie Moss. I won't go back. Robert Shaw, the man who had found sobriety in the church, still struggles. I want to get over this anger, he says. I want to get back into a relationship with God, but the foundation took that away from us. Epilogue. The cost of the covenant. In the end, greed is not just about the accumulation of wealth. It is about the erosion of the social contract. We trust our doctors to heal us. We trust our spiritual leaders to guide us. We trust our neighbors to tell the truth. When that trust is weaponized, the damage goes deeper than any bank account. Joyce Brannon died because she believed the truth was worth more than her life. Bill Anderson worked himself into a heart attack because he believed his stewardship was a divine duty. The desert still shimmers in Phoenix. The wind still howls through the streets of Chicago. And the lesson remains: beware the man who quotes the Bible while reaching for your wallet. And watch the hand of the doctor who offers a sandwich with one hand while hiding a script for a lie in the other. Faith is a beautiful thing, but blind faith is a luxury the world can no longer afford. The End, Part 1, Narrative Summary. The Altar of Avarice, a Chronicle of Betrayal. Prologue, The Mirage. The heat in Phoenix doesn't just burn, it suffocates. It is a dry, unrelenting weight that presses against the soul, blurring the horizon until the shimmering asphalt looks like water. In 1982, the city was rising from the dust like the mythical bird of its namesake, and for the faithful of the Southern Baptist Church, that rise was more than economic, it was providential. They called it stewardship. It was a word that tasted like honey and felt like a warm embrace. To the thousands of retirees who had migrated to the desert to spend their twilight years in the shadow of the cigarros, stewardship meant more than just money. It meant building the kingdom of heaven while securing a modest earthly comfort. But as the sun began to set on a decade of unprecedented growth, the line between divine providence and human greed began to thin. In the hallowed halls of the Baptist Foundation of Arizona, a new kind of gospel was being preached, a gospel of double-digit returns and magnificent money machines for God. They thought they were giving to the Lord. They didn't realize they were feeding a beast that would eventually consume everything they owned. Chapter 1, The Shepherd of Phoenix. Bill Kratz was not a man who walked. He processed. When he entered a room, the air seemed to settle, hushed by the sheer gravity of his reputation. At 34, he was already a legend within the Southern Baptist Convention, an attorney with a mind like a steel trap and a heart that supposedly beat for the mission field. The foundation is more than an investment fund, Kratz would say, his voice a melodic baritone that echoed from the pulpits of Scottsdale to the nursing homes of Tucson. It is a vehicle for the spirit. Your dollars don't just sit in a vault. They build low-income housing. They feed the hungry. They support the elderly. And while they do this work, they grow because God wants his people to prosper. He was the financial pope of the Arizona Baptists. When he spoke of wise stewardship, people didn't see a ledger, they saw the face of Christ. Bill Anderson and his wife, Pat, were among the believers. Bill was a retired plant manager, a man who measured his life in honest hours and calloused hands. Pat was his anchor, a woman of quiet strength who had survived a life-threatening brain aneurysm 3 years prior. That brush with death had turned their eyes toward eternity. They weren't looking to get rich. They were looking for meaning. We were totally engrossed, Bill would later recall, his voice cracking with the memory. We were baptized into the fellowship. We found peace there. And when the men in the suits came to the church and talked about the BFA, it felt like an extension of our faith. Why would we give our money to a cold, secular bank when we could give it to the foundation? They were paying 10%. The banks were offering 6%. It was a blessing. In their modest home, Bill and Pat sat across from a salesman who quoted scripture as easily as he cited interest rates. The salesman spoke of kingdom building. He showed them brochures featuring smiling seniors and new church steeples. Not one investor has ever lost a penny, the salesman promised, leaning in with a conspiratorial whisper. And we are audited by Arthur Andersen, the biggest firm in the world. Your money is safer here than in a Federal Reserve vault. Bill looked at Pat. She nodded. They signed the papers. $200,000, their entire life's work, was transferred into the hands of Bill Kratz. They weren't alone. Robert Shaw, a car salesman who had found sobriety and salvation in the pews after a midlife crisis, put in every cent he had, $250,000. He even set aside $60,000 for his daughter's college education, tucked away in what he believed was the safest place on earth. The money flowed into the BFA like a mighty river, but downstream, the water was already turning bitter. Chapter 2: The Architect's Shadow. Inside the posh Phoenix headquarters of the BFA, the atmosphere was corporate, but sanitized by a layer of religious piety. Portraits of missionaries hung alongside real estate maps. Bill Kratz sat at the head of a mahogany table, flanked by his right-hand man, Tom Grabinski. Grabinski was the legal mind, the man who drafted the contracts and navigated the regulatory labyrinths. Together, they were the architects of a vision that was rapidly outgrowing reality. The problem was the land. Kratz had bet everything on the Arizona real estate bubble. He bought raw desert land, commercial lots, and sprawling developments, convinced that the Phoenix sun would always keep prices rising. But in the late 1980s, the bubble didn't just leak, it burst. We're down $40 million on the Mesa project, Grabinski whispered in a late-night session, the glow of the computer monitor casting long shadows across his face. Kratz didn't flinch. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the red ink. We don't admit defeat. Tom, if we tell the investors we lost money, the withdrawals will start. If the withdrawals start, the foundation collapses. And if the foundation collapses, the Southern Baptist Convention is disgraced. Do you want to be the man who tells 10,000 seniors that their godly investment is gone? What do we do? Kratz leaned back. We create a buffer, a company that isn't on our books. We'll call it Allo, a bad bank. We sell our losing properties to Allo at a profit. BFA stays in the black. Allo takes the debt. But where does Allo get the money to buy the properties from us? Kratz smiled a thin, mirthless smile. We loan it to them, using the new money coming in from the investors. It was the birth of the circular flow, a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a prayer shawl. To keep the balls in the air, they needed a constant, increasing stream of new victims. They needed more stewardship seminars. They needed more Bible-quoting salesmen in nursing homes. And most of all, they needed the silence of the watchdogs. Chapter 3: The Whistleblower's Burden. Kyle Tresh arrived in Phoenix in 1994 with a heart full of idealism. The son of a preacher from Tulsa, Tresh was a devout young attorney who saw his job at the BFA as a calling. He wanted to use his legal skills to protect the flock. For the first few months, it was a dream. The office morale was infectious. Everyone seemed to believe they were on the front lines of a spiritual war. But Tresh was a man who paid attention to details. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, he began to notice discrepancies. The sales were too perfect. The valuations of the land held by Allah were astronomical, far above the market rate of the surrounding desert. He began to dig through the files, piecing together a money trail that led nowhere but back to itself. It's a mirage, Tresh whispered to himself as he sat in the darkened archives. He found for staff accountants who shared his suspicions. They met in secret, like early Christians in the catacombs, comparing notes on the manufactured profits. They realized that every year, Arthur Anderson was giving the BFA a clean bill of health, despite the glaring red flags of the Allo transactions. In April 1996, Tresh couldn't stay silent any longer. He and the accountants requested a meeting with Kratz and Verbinski. The atmosphere in the boardroom was icy. Kratz sat at the head of the table, his hands folded as if in prayer. "Bill," Tresh began, his voice trembling slightly, "we've looked at the Allo notes. The Foundation is claiming hundreds of